Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're in the stream.
And I'm Malika Bilal. Today, who will save the Rohingya? It's a story our community pitched.
Now, unfortunately, the plight of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar is a story that we've covered several times, starting way back in 2012. These are some of the different episodes we've done over the years. So, why the Rohingya still dying? They're described as the most persecuted people on earth, and despite calls for help, the situation is worsening for Myanmar's Rohingya population. Over the past 2 weeks, roughly 150,000 Rohingya Muslims have flooded into neighbouring Bangladesh after a resurgence of violence between a small Rohingya armed group and the Myanmar military.
The mass exodus has sparked a major humanitarian crisis. Many do not have enough food or shelter, and UN officials say aid deliveries are being blocked and supply warehouses looted. And now the UN Secretary General is warning the situation is at risk of ethnic cleansing. So what can be done? Joining us to discuss this, WAKAR UDDIN. He's the Director General of the ARAKAN Rohingya Union, an international coalition of Rohingya from around the world. Than Luen Tone, he's Chief for the Voice of America Burmese Service.
We also have Derek Mitchell. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Myanmar, now a senior advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And in Brussels, Simon Ingram. He's the head of communications for UNICEF. Gentlemen, thank you for being on the show today. Let me start with a question, which is, how bad is it right now for the Rohingya, either in Myanmar or actually trying to get out of Myanmar? Have a look at this video from the UNHCR. WAKAR, every time we invite you to be part of this conversation, the many times we've done this show on the stream, it seems like the conditions for Rohingya are getting worse and worse and worse. Where are we right now?
We are currently at a catastrophic stage. The situation cannot be described worse than what's happening today. As you indicated earlier, the 150,000 have crossed into Bangladesh already, but we do not know exact number of how many is stranded inside Myanmar in the forest, in the wooded areas, reportedly over 80,000+ people. You have seen the pictures in the seashores trying to go to see any help that can come with any kind of vessel. So this is a major humanitarian catastrophic disaster unfolding as we speak.
Simon, UNICEF in Myanmar, is your team there right now?
Well, we've had operations ongoing in Myanmar for many years now, and at least up until the 25th of August, when the violence first erupted, we had teams on the ground working right across northern Rakhine state, working on things like water and sanitation, nutrition programs, education, and so on. However, since that day, basically, it's been impossible for us to undertake any actual operations on the ground within Myanmar. And for the foreseeable future, at least for the time being, we're basically concentrating our efforts inside Bangladesh, trying to do something to help the people flowing across in such incredible numbers. And really, the pictures which you showed there captured better than any words could the true horror of what these people have been through, and just how incredibly difficult their situation is, arriving literally with the shirts on their backs and nothing more.
You mentioned the people that are fleeing into Bangladesh. This person on Twitter, this Operation Rohingya, blames that on the military campaign and says that those displaced need access to shelter, food, and medicine. Luen, I know that you have stringers and people on the ground. What are they telling you about what people are facing? Is it, and how deep and dire the need for food and medicine might be?
First of all, as a journalist, I have to insist that to have a kind of a correct information about what is happening, so to let the war or other people who at stake, and also people who want to help to understand correctly. So, for example, like this number, I just saw it in a first in a videos, 120,000. But today's estimate is about 160,000 people across the Burma in a Bangladesh camp. But today I spoke to that. We spoke to UNHCR director in the region. She was just emphasizing that, saying that it is estimate. And also, they don't know whether, they don't even know that these people, Rohingyas, are actually from the area, or actually they are fleeing, actually cross the border or not. So my point is, okay, these are the number of the people over there. They are in a really in a crisis situation. But we need to understand that there might be a people inside Burma who are dislocated or has to flee from their villages. Not only Rohingya or Muslim, it is ethnic Arakanese or other ethnic indigenous people as well. There's the situation is about two communities. So we need to emphasize the problem about both sides of that situation.
So I understand what Kotan Luntu is saying, but we have to remember that these people, two groups of people, one Rohingya and one Buddhist Rakhine. Buddhist Rakhine have been moved to monasteries and schools and other places. Government gave them shelter. They are not in the woods. They are not in the river. They are not getting shot. So these are very small numbers. So Myanmar government is inflating the number, saying using both communities is truly one-sided.
Is it the Myanmar government inflating the numbers, or is it the aid communities and the NGOs who are estimating the numbers because they can't get to the areas where they need to actually say, okay, we can say with certainty. Journalists maybe can't get into Rakhine State, for instance.
That would be quite unfair for talking about those figures. For example, like, of course, there's a lot of Buddhist Arakanese or local indigenous people who had a shelter. But there's a lot of indigenous ethnic villages being also equally burned down and have to move and have to stay in the jungle as well. Their estimate number is about 20,000 as far as we understand.
Before this, at the beginning of the offensive, what military did was they're planning to assault Rohingya villages at the outlying areas. They're Mrong, Rakhine, and others. Their village, they have moved, they have relocated these villages systematically in the south of Maungdaw. Their protection has been given before the assault has started. This is part of the pre-planning. You know what else? I want to make this point. Myanmar military, Myanmar government is dropping the food, bring the food for them in the shelters. Okay, they don't have any issue, a humanitarian issue, crisis with food and medicine and water. But Rohingya people are running out of food, absolutely running out of food. I spoke to families directly. They said, we have one more day to eat. What do we do? They cannot get out, you know. So I think this situation is truly imbalanced. We have to make sure that it's not the same thing between Rakhine and Rohingya people have been displaced.
So I hear you there, but I want to share this. This is from Deepak, who saw we were doing the story and wanted us to know the Rohingya issue isn't all black and white, they write. There's a section of radicalized Rohingya, they say, indulging in terror attacks against Buddhist and Hindu minority. So picking up on this point that there are two sides, perhaps. Derek, I know that you just returned from Myanmar about a week ago. Mm-hmm. What was it that you had access to? What could you see?
Well, I wasn't in Rakhine State. I went back to the country. I went actually up to Kachin State, where there's also tragedy going on with a military offensive and people in entirely displaced camps. So we also have to look at this in context of the overall country, which has been undergoing a decades-long civil war that has also been expanded, and people are suffering to the north and east, as well as to the west. But that's not to say, I want to jump in and what was said a moment ago about numbers and relative tragedy. There's no doubt that the Rohingya are undergoing relative deprivation. The fact that they are stateless makes them a uniquely deprived and vulnerable people that need to be addressed. However, I think we do have to recognize the context. There's a question of the immediate humanitarian challenge that must be addressed, these 100,000, whatever number of people across the border or inside Myanmar need to be gotten aid and assistance. Then there's a longer term issue of how do you solve this? It's easy to identify the problem. It's much harder to solve. We're looking at a symptom of a long-standing challenge and a context that is deeply entrenched over not just the past 5 years, but many decades, if not centuries. And that's the question I think the international community needs to grapple with if we are truly going to defend the Rohingya over the long term.
I totally agree with what Derek said. But the thing
Simon,
is,
I hear you. We'll come right back to you.
Yeah, the thing is that, of course, I also agree that you're worried about your people. But what you want to see? You want to see those problems solved. So that the main issue is, even now, within your statement and my statement, our views a little bit of different from seeing the situation. Main thing is correct information, I insist, and also not to be misinformed or exaggerate things. For example, like there may be some sort of different reason or connotations about using a word genocide. So my question is, as a journalist, use of that ethnic word like ethnic cleansing, genocide, does it actually help the ground situation to solve problems or to get that two communities understand each other or to lessen that animosity?
Yeah, I get your point, but the thing is genocide or ethnic cleansing, whether it's helping or not is one issue. That's we have to deal with. But the thing is it happening? The question is it ethnic cleansing happening? As the villages have been rooted out, people have been forced out. Is it an immigration issue really? No, it's not immigration issue, there's a pretext. So, Kota Luin like said, in misinformation. Aung San Suu Kyi said, iceberg of misinformation is helping the terrorists. In misinformation by who? Myanmar government is extensively involved, engaged, you may have seen that, in misinformation. You know, just a couple of days ago, BBC has a piece showing a picture. Let me make this very clear. I want to point this out. BBC has a piece that's showing...
WAKAR, hold tight for a moment. I am not going to discuss a former employer on this particular show. I care about you and what you have to say. I'm not going to bring another broadcaster into this conversation. Just hold tight for a minute, because I did say to Simon, who was trying to get in a little bit earlier, that I would allow him in. Simon, go ahead.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to build a little bit on the point that Derek made about the context in Rakhine State. I had the great opportunity earlier this year to do some reporting, direct reporting for UNICEF in Rakhine State and more broadly across the country. And what came through to me very clearly in Rakhine was the fact that all communities there are really victims of the incredible underdevelopment that state has suffered. Makes it about roughly really the poorest part of the country, where education standards are very low, the lowest in the country. Access to medical services is incredibly sketchy and thin, and where malnutrition is an ongoing and ever-present threat, especially for children. I think it's terribly important that we understand that this tragedy that's affecting Rakhine State, the impact is being felt right across the board. Although, of course, we can argue about the extent to which one community or another is suffering more than the other, as it were.
I agree with what Simon said. It's a very poor state, poverty is rampage. But we are not talking about economics. We don't have time to talk about economics. We are talking about lives. Saving lives. When you can save lives, you can talk about food. You can save lives, you can talk about education. You know, this is dire situation right now. I want to go back to that. I will not mention anything about the other broadcasting.
But I do want to mention, because I want to push on, WAKAR. But go ahead.
Yes. I want to make sure that I convey this message. I've seen the pictures Myanmar government used propaganda as a fake news that Bangladesh fighting Pakistan during the war in 1971, those Bengali fighters with guns,
let me use another example that I can actually share with our audience, because I cannot vouch for something that I cannot see. All right, so this is the Deputy Prime Minister of Turkey. He's been tweeting a lot about the situation in Myanmar. He shared this tweet a couple of days ago. This is a massacre against Rohingya Muslims. Stop turning a blind eye. Each of these pictures that he shared, people did a little check, a little bit of social media verification. None of them were of Rohingya. None of them were of this current crisis. In fact, this one here, you can see, you don't even need to be an expert here to see this is not of Rohingya. And then he had to, in a couple of days later, send an apology out and said, I'm sorry, I mistweeted. None of these pictures was of the Rohingya situation. I think that is probably a better example, someone who's trying to draw attention, who made a mistake with basically the idea of, am I sharing this crisis
people do mistakes. People do mistakes. I understand that. But the thing is that Myanmar government is producing so much fake news, so much doctored videos and Photoshop news that's overwhelming the real, authentic pictures. Authentic information is getting overwhelmed and undermining the authentic information. You said it's about the humanitarian crisis happening down on the ground. Malika, where do you want to take us?
I want to take us to the majority of tweets that we're getting, and they are about Myanmar's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. This is Fatima Ansari. She says, years of military rule has forced democratic factions to adopt equally authoritarian methods to stay in power, and Burma or Myanmar is one of those examples. She goes on to say that the battle-hardened political leader would rather watch the minority burn than risk seeing her career being sabotaged by the state again. Derek, there is a lot of criticism for Suu Kyi online. How much of it do you think is valid, and do you think she's done enough?
I think it's valid to the critique that she could have done more to speak out on behalf of this population, maybe even to act a little bit more assertively on their behalf on the humanitarian side and such. But look, I've spent many hours talking to her about many issues. I've talked to her in depth on this particular issue before she took power. I do have confidence she understands the complexities. She recognized that even her political party is not popular in Rakhine State, that this was going to be very difficult for her, given the overwhelming majority. I mean, we're talking 90+% of the people of this country believe that the Rohingya are not part of the fabric, the national fabric of Myanmar. You know, she has to push back and deal with a Rakhine context that is very, very complex. So she wanted to have a little bit more time and space to deal with the issue. I think the militant action has then compressed that time. So, and she certainly could have said and done much more publicly. I can't defend everything that she has said.
What do you think is going on behind the scenes? You have spoken to her, you've worked in Myanmar. What do you think is going on behind the scenes? Meanwhile, the international community is saying, you need to speak out, but what's going on that we don't know about?
Well, first of all, I don't know that she has a very good communications team, and she understands how what she says resonates internationally. She has a domestic constituency she's trying to placate as a politician, and then an international constituency that is also on top of her. So I think her communications is very bad. I think she also, you know, has a lot of pressure from the military. She just can't control that military under this constitution. She gets her information, which is very murky, from them and other sources. And when there's an attack like by the ARSA folks, she is put on the defensive and very unable to do anything but support the national sovereignty and territorial integrity as it's viewed by the military of the country. So she's in a bit of a box, but she is the leader of the country, and this is what she signed up for.
Derek, yes, you're very right. The situation is very complex. Aung San Suu Kyi understands this very complex situation. And also, the question now for me is that, so if the Rohingya community or Muslim community or international communities don't trust Aung San Suu Kyi, what she is doing right now, what is the alternative?
Let me just play you something here. This is Peter Popham. Peter Popham is the biographer of Aung San Suu Kyi, and he's been following the news headlines and the pressure that's being put on her to speak out. This is what he said. Have a listen.
Aung San Suu Kyi gets all the international flack, as we see this week. Min Aung Hlaing, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the Burmese army, is unknown to the outside world. He is the guy who is calling the shots in Rakhine State, just as Senior General Than Shwe before him was calling the shots when they crushed the democracy uprising in 2007. That's where the international criticism should be directed at the man who has the power to stop it.
LWIN, what are you hearing about the military, the way they're thinking, the way they're dealing with this international furore about the Rohingya?
I have to admit that you also know that Burmese military has a very, very bad reputation and a history anyway. But what we have to know is that this is a democratically elected government. Although everybody knows that, everybody understands that, even Derek pointed out that she doesn't have, although she is a kind of de facto head of the state, she doesn't have much of the control of the military over there. But very recently,
much or any control.
Yeah, the thing is, very short while ago, Myanmar Online came up and said that we are and that we are just following the order from the government, or this is what he said, or whether I don't know actually what is happening. But the thing is, Aung San Suu Kyi, what she didn't do is, of course, she took the power, but she didn't have a kind of a proper communication with the army who is in the ground.
Do you think she's just inexperienced and not very good at leading her country? That's a possibility.
Well, that's a possibility. I would say
not deliberately trying to ignore the Rohingya. She just doesn't know how to cope.
I agree with what Derek said, and then this clip said about Aung San Suu Kyi calling the Myanmar Online, calling the shot. Okay. Now the question is, of course, USDP and NLD are the rivals, right? So USDP military would like to see NLD coming down. That's no question about that. What Aung San Suu Kyi has a judgment call, I believe. Although she is the best choice for the people of the country for now, alternative to the military, like LWIN too said, but she has a judgment call. She is acting like she has become a mouthpiece for the military. She should not have said what she has said on many occasions, what conforming to what military says.
There's someone that might agree with you. This is Ronan Lee. I want to add this in. This is Ronan, who's watching and tweeting furiously. He's a researcher on this region. He says Suu Kyi's silence is shameful. The situation is too serious now, and we can't wait for her. The Rohingya need UN Security Council action now. There's someone else who also wants action from the international community. This is the spokeswoman for the European Rohingya Council, and this is what she told the stream.
It must be the utmost priority to save the lives of every single Rohingya in Rakhine state by ensuring a safe path to escape the atrocities committed by the Myanmar military. The international community must stand up to its legal obligation, announce that there is genocide against the Rohingya community going on in Rakhine state, and take legal actions.
So, Derek, I know you were trying to get in there, more international action.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, as I say, there's no doubt that the images speak for themselves and the situation of the Rohingya speak for themselves. It's something that has to be addressed, and the humanitarian situation is absolutely dire. So I don't want to minimize that. I do want to say, though, one thing that we have not discussed during this half hour is how this current crisis came about, which was an attack by the group, the ARAKAN Rohingya Salvation Army, on border forces. It came the day after Kofi Annan released its final report and recommendations on a new political approach to the question in northern Rakhine state with the Rohingya. That was a moment of opportunity that was lost and actually spoiled by ARSA. We need to focus on that problem as well. I think this is what ARSA's strategy might have been. It certainly did not help the Rohingya themselves. It created what was a backlash by the military that was pretty predictable. So I think continued attacks, continued militarizing of this issue is only going to hurt the citizens on the ground. So I think we also, all of us, need to condemn that action and get back to the Annan Commission recommendations and a political
All right,
solution.
let me give the last few words to Simon. I'm going to give the last few words to Simon because we're almost out of time. Simon, you're working with UNICEF. What do you need right now? What do the refugees need right now?
Well, the most urgent thing is to get more help to the Bangladeshi side of the border. That's the first instance, to get the basic needs met of these people who are flooding across in terms of water and sanitation, food, shelter, and so on and so forth, and also protection for children. They come across so traumatized by what they've been through. That has to be the first step.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. The time has flown by. This conversation is not over yet, I know. Malika, what do you have? How are people reacting to this?
Op Rohingya says business as usual cannot continue while such serious crimes are taking place.
WAKAR Ambassador LWIN, Simon, thank you for being on this edition of The Stream. We continue our conversation. #AJStream. Take care.